Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're finally going to be talking about the newest album from P.O.S. called Chill, Dummy. There's been a part of me that's been a lot more reticent to talk about this album than I probably should be. Part of it is that I've gone on record a number of times that of all the members of Doomtree, P.O.S. is probably my least favorite. Now that's not saying he's a bad MC. Every member of that group can spit incredibly well, and they all have a knack for fantastic, really hard-hitting hooks. But from my experience with both his solo projects and his Doomtree verses, P.O.S. is trying to walk a very high-wire act that's high reward but high risk. Of the group, he's always been the most outwardly political and borderline punk, not just in his content but his production, which often feels assembled from the rough-edged shambles of his Doomtree work balanced with more ramshackle punk sounds. Combined with a penchant for bombast, there's a line between righteous anthems anchored in real firepower and slipping towards a sort of self-indulgent corniness that can either be grudgingly tolerated or facepalm worthy. It's no surprise that he was signed to Slug's label Rhymesayers. They both share a lot in common in that regard. And just like with Slug and Atmosphere, I can find P.O.S. a frustrating MC, especially with some of his cringier punchlines and flows and delivery that can be uncannily similar to Eminem, especially early on. So okay, what about his albums? Well again, given that I'm not really a huge fan of his, I have a hard time calling out one as an absolute favorite before going into Chill Dummy. I will say that Audition was probably the one that annoyed me the most in terms of frustrating lines and tones, but Never Better was a more refined pivot that featured more of the Doomtree crew and was arguably better for it, albeit going on a lot longer than it probably should have. Now that problem was corrected by his 2012 project We Don't Even Live Here, but that album was frustrating because for all the stronger grooves and some of his best ever hooks, between some awkward synth tone choices and some very questionable lyrics, it fell towards some uneven territory. So okay, did similar issues show up on his new album, Chill Dummy? Well, alright. This is a tough record to evaluate, and from what I can tell from hardcore P.O.S. fans, they've even left them a little stymied on what to think about this. For one, it's easily one of his furthest away from Doomtree to date, featuring no guest verses from the crew and only Laserbeak's production on 2 songs, instead bringing in a broader selection of guest singers and rappers for an experience that almost feels deliberately fragmented and more scattershot. If you're looking to come in expecting the focused political anthems or even the ruckus bangers, well okay, adjust your expectations, because this is a pivot into some very different territory. Now, whether or not that territory is good, that's a very different question, and a lot tougher to ascertain. So okay, let's start off with P.O.S. himself. And look, the guy's a solid as hell rapper and one hell of a performer, and this album takes him through the gamut of emotional range, from more meticulous contemplation that shows up on Infinite Scroll or the sentimental moments on Faded, to the pure rage that burns through Sleep Drone Superposition. Now, I do question some of his choices to sing, particularly in the opener Born a Snake. He sticks the landing a little bit better on Lanes later in the album, but my larger questions circle around his flows more than his delivery. Now, for the most part, I prefer P.O.S.'s bars when they're a little bit more structured and tightly woven, and yet, more often than not, this record found itself with flows that are more blunt and basic, shorter words and phrases that often rhyme but can feel increasingly disconnected from each other, or in the case of Pieces Ruins, from that beat itself it doesn't seem to fit. I can't stress how awkward that track feels before Dwinell Rowland and especially Busdriver emerged to ride that borderline trap beat, because P.O.S. barely even feels on rhythm there. Granted, these are not easy beats to ride or flow against, which might be why some of these verses might feel more compact, but it's also not helped by a pileup of vocal filters and a lot of pitch shifting across this album that really only serves to blur lines or disguise moment where the wordplay doesn't quite connect, especially when he's rhyming words with themselves, and some of his guest stars do it too. And that's not counting points where P.O.S. can't even seem to pull a hook together, like on the end of Wearing a Bear, which yes, I get going for more of that punk aesthetic, but there is a difference between that and what could be mistaken by some for being kind of sloppy. But this circles back to the production, and if you all remember my review of Sims's absolutely amazing album More Than Ever, you recall what I thought of his production that was going to more alien, twisted tones that could even be borderline industrial. Now, throughout most of this album, P.O.S.'s production is similarly daunting, but once you get over the howling, buzzy waves of synth, the grind of guitars, the bass textures that are really all over the place, and the shifts in beat and mixing fidelity across the first half of this album, it really does kind of get distracting from track to track, especially from the dirty royal of the drums on Bully to the overly clean, albeit creepy atmospherics of Faded, a song that could have picked up some really solid dark ambiance that P.O.S. underplaying quite well if he hadn't gone to get Justin Vernon of Bon Iver to add crooning that doesn't remotely match him or the husky female singer Lady Midnight. But the frustrating thing is that the more I went through this album, the more it seemed like certain production choices were flagrantly compromising themselves. From the first two tracks that both feel very abortive to Get Eighth that doesn't even last 90 seconds before an abrupt transition, to how Thieves Kings hold a solid conceptual parallel again against a good hollow synth melody, only to be squandered by an outro full of this distorted crooning melody that doesn't fit, doesn't help at all. And you know, it's frustrating because when P.O.S. does get focused, we can get some solid production and beats here. The piano and murky fuzz around Infinite Scroll where both Open Mike Eagle and Manchita deliver great verses, the warping elongated guitar tones across Gravedigger where she brings her own ferocious balance to match P.O.S, and Laserbeak's deeper synths and the guitar tones against the bubbly low bass and drums that devolve into the murk on Roddy Piper. Hell, even for a shorter song like Lanes, it works with the buzzier melodies and rougher drums. Well, it's because it's tight as hell and the hook actually works. Contrast this to Sleep Drone Superposition. Good hook, solid build-up, but the song goes on for nearly 9 minutes and it could have easily been trimmed back for stronger impact and real focus for me. So okay, fine. We got a set of songs that feel kind of misshapen, more than a little fragmented, and really nowhere near as hook-driven as his previous work. Do the lyrics and themes at least come together? Well, okay, according to P.O.S, this is his least directly political work to date, which some might consider rather shocking given the political turmoil right now might seem ripe for his commentary, but instead he's turning inwards, focusing on what was lost when he recovered from a kidney transplant in his current state of mind and trying to wrap through some personal issues. And given the curdled mass of frustrated self-awareness that runs through tracks like Born a Snake and Faded, the hardcore aggression of Bully, and the drunken barroom tale of Roddy Piper that lends in a pantless haze and a desire to vent emotions despite there being no audience, there really are some harrowing moments. Now, that's not saying that there aren't politics here. Wearing a Bear and Sleep Drone Superposition mention Black Lives Matter and the deaths there with the frank practicality, and that also runs through the career reflections of Lanes and Gravedigger, or of the criminals at the top assertions of Thieves Kings. Although P.O.S. seems much more interested in the follow-up question of how one deals with any of it going forward. Although the nihilism that comes in the last case of how we're all going to end up dead anyways, it does kind of dampen the mood, doesn't quite work, but as you would expect, he's not one to place value and real confidence in most modern social media and technology. Because while Open Mike Eagle crystallizes his reason and Manchita exposes hypocrisies by embracing it on Infinite Scroll, it finds P.O.S. even more on the feral outside, where for all that harshness, it's a savage lane that he's owned for a long-ass time. And while he might not outlast more accessible hip-hop in some other lanes because of the practicalities of that savageness, Gravedigger makes it clear that he'd prefer the flash in his path than the lingering numbness that comes with sacrificing his fame for time. Hey, Big Sean. And that indeed might be the biggest underlying theme of all this, crystallized in Sleep Drone Superposition. He's coming to accept all the emotional peril and pain as various states of probability, owning it all instead of letting numbness cancel it all out. And this is where my degree in physics comes in handy, so I can explain quantum superposition to all of you. So to boil it down to the absolute poetic basics, it's a case where an infinite number of possibilities and probabilities where we might be all and exist in time or all in the same parallel, all possible. There might be constraints on one's lane, but by embodying all of them, by owning all possibilities, certain elements of the waveform, of the particle, of the person, they're amplified and owned beyond all else. Now, moving beyond the science, I've always operated under the impression that this was somewhat standard operating procedure for P.O.S. He never seemed to be the one to sell out, especially given his very hard political bent. But despite the frustratingly fragmented nature of this album's composition, I can definitely see this being his most personal work to date. I do wish the hooks had a little bit more punch, and there are elements of sloppiness that did frustrate me here. Two of the factors that are keeping me from loving this in comparison with stronger work from other Doomtree members. But you know what? This is still good, and there's a potent core to the bars and flows that, yeah, it works, at least for me. As such, I'm giving this a very light 7 out of 10, but a recommendation, particularly if you're looking for some hard-edged, aggressive hip-hop, and you're looking for a real challenge with some of the content and piecing it all together. Again, after this, wouldn't really call myself a P.O.S. fan, but I respect him a fair bit more after this. So in other words, solid work. Check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Got the link in the description below if anything I described intrigues you, and I got the poll up here. So I'm honestly curious where P.O.S. fans fall on this record, so if there's your opportunity to tell me. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get more involved in my schedule, the link to my Patreon is right there, where a couple times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week on Saturdays, the higher Patreon members get to add records or even movies to my schedule. Now, I'm still looking to do some reconfiguration of my setup here, but let's see how things go. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.